So I was setting out for my first field research trip into the Peruvian Amazon, the first of many to collect data for my PhD research. I was headed to a town called Moyobamba in the state of San Martin, and that's the launching point for visiting the Alto Mayo Protected Forest, a large forest carbon offset project, also known as RED, which is a policy mechanism to reduce carbon emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. So I'm a human environment geographer, like Miriam said, and I was going there to learn what happens on the ground when someone in the US purchases carbon credits from this specific conservation project. What was going on in the Alto Mayo that prevented deforestation and increased forest carbon sequestration? So unlike a lot of graduate students, I wasn't part of a lab. I wasn't following an advisor or other academics. I wasn't joining an existing project. I was headed to the jungle completely alone to see what I could find. I flew from Denver to Dallas, Dallas to San Salvador to Lima. I spent a few days in Lima and then returned to the airport to hop a small plane to Tarapoto, a city on the edge of the Amazon region. Once in Tarapoto, I rode a 3-wheeled covered motorcycle to the Colectivo station, where I caught a Colectivo, a sort of independent group taxi, that took me on a 3-hour windy ride to Moyobamba, where I took another motorbike to my hotel, one of the only places visitors could stay in that town. Moyobamba is remote, and it's a regional agricultural hub on the cusp of major development. Many households don't have running water, and there's only a few paved streets downtown. It's not a tourist town, and they don't see many visitors from outside of Peru. I spent several weeks catching rides as deep as I could into the protected forest and exploring on foot to see what types of settlement, development, and agricultural activities were going on. I took meetings with forest managers and conservation practitioners, but I was mostly alone, chatting only in my self-taught Spanish with folks I encountered along the way. Most nights I ate alone in the same restaurant in town. One night I saw a man staring at me from a few tables away. He was about 70, white hair, glasses, kind of short. He finally approached my table and said in English, "I can tell by your accent that you're not from around here." And I was like, really? That's just my accent? We started talking, and his name was Luis. He had grown up in a nearby village, but he had spent most of his career as a cardiologist in the US. He invited me to come with him the next morning to see a little medical clinic he was building in the village Yontalo. It would be a day away from my conservation research, but fieldwork taught me to be flexible and to say yes, so I agreed. The next morning it was pouring rain, and I was surprised when Luis actually showed up on foot to meet me at my hotel. Because just as much as fieldwork taught me to say yes, it also taught me to be very skeptical. Luis and I took a Colectivo to Yontalo, where we were stopped by armed men along the road. Luis handed them a few coins and told me, "They're okay, they're protecting the town from outsiders." I was terrified. In Yontalo, Luis first took me to see the existing medical clinic, a 2-room building with 3 walls, a collapsing roof, and a few very ill patients in a line of hospital beds. I put on my sunglasses so the patients couldn't see me cry. Next, we went on to see Luis's clinic, which turned out to be a big mud pit in the middle of a field with some concrete and rebar sticking out. We walked over to a lean-to where construction workers were having lunch. Luis showed me a wall with detailed architectural plans for a small hospital, a cafeteria, a crematorium, and an organic farm. I was struck by the contrast between this mud pit before me and the advanced professional plans on the wall. I asked him, "Who in the US knows about this?" And he said, "Do you know Dartmouth College?" And I started to cry, but this time from joy. Dartmouth, my alma mater, a place I love with all my heart, had sent engineering and business students to Yontalo to help with designing the clinic and to make a business plan. It was in that moment that I started to believe what Luis was telling me all along, that this little medical clinic would become one of, if not the premier medical centers in northern Peru. Over the years, each time I returned to Moyobamba, I took a day to visit Yantalo. And when he was there, I saw Luis. I spoke to Luis on the phone several times from the US, asking what they needed at the clinic and what I could bring to donate. I even made a few small grad student sized donations to the clinic. Very small, like $20. The last time I went to Yantalo, the clinic was completely built and the organic farm was thriving. I checked out the air-conditioned operating suites, the cafeteria, and walked through the adjacent pineapple fields and mahogany plantation. Luis wasn't there. He was actually visiting family in Colorado, which is where I live. But I had lunch with a visiting intern from St. Louis, learned about teams of volunteer doctors and medical students who would come through to help build capacity and treat urgent patients. And I left a bag of toys for kids who were coming in for care. What became of the clinic at Yantalo was beyond what I could have ever imagined that first time I visited with Luis and saw the mud pit and the architecture plans. I've moved on from studying the Alto Mayo protected forest. The more I learned about carbon markets and climate policy, I realized that those types of RED projects aren't the best sites for studying the offset mechanism. The research questions that took me there just don't seem that interesting anymore or even valid. But I still would like to return to San Martin, not for the research, but for the people. Luis, his kindness, and the clinic at Yantalo remain close to my heart. One of my biggest takeaways from years of traveling to the edge of the Amazon is that research will shift, field sites will come and go, my career will evolve. But one thing that remains important is the humans I've met along the way. Thanks.